You know what the market hates? Uncertainty. What is more uncertain than a presidential election that hasn't been decided? No one knows which way this is going to go. So you have a very limited time to get in front of this, to get ahead of an economic meltdown. Now is the time to protect your investments, your savings, your retirement. It's time to diversify a portion of your savings into gold or silver with Birch Gold Group. This is the company to trust. Birch Gold will help you legally convert any eligible IRA or 401k into a precious metals IRA, or just buy gold or silver to lock in your personal safe. Text Newt to 474747. Get a free info kit on diversifying into gold, and then call Birch Gold. These guys are the best. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and countless 5-star reviews. Text Newt to 474747 and open a precious metals IRA and secure your savings today. Again, text Newt to 474747. The following is a meeting of my Newt's Inner Circle membership club where I answer your questions about the election. To join my inner circle, go to newtsinnercircle.com. This may be the most confusing inner circle gathering we've had so far. And that's because I have never seen such an amazing mess. If you follow our podcast, we've just begun a series I'm calling The Honest Election Chronicles. Yesterday, we interviewed 3 people from Nevada, where I am totally convinced that the Democratic legislature and the Democratic governor conspired in the spring to steal the state, and did so by passing laws which make corruption legal. And I think it's going to require federal involvement to protect the rights, just as it did during the age of segregation, when local states adopted laws that blocked African Americans from voting. Right now, the Democrats in Nevada have decided to steal the state with no regard for the rest of the United States or those citizens who are independents and Republican who don't agree. There are an estimated 600,000 votes that no Republican has seen. And under the current state law that they adopted this spring, there's no provision for them to ever be able to get there, no matter what. So clearly that can't stand. You cannot have an entire state in a presidential election or a Senate or House election, any federal election, taken off the board by the local corrupt political machine. The second example, we just did 2 interviews with people in Georgia. I've spent a lot of time in Georgia. As you know, I was the congressman from there for 20 years. My daughter, Jackie Cushman, still lives there. We have an enormous number of friends there. I believe that the margin by which Biden is carrying the state is about 3 times as many votes that were absentee ballots that should not have been counted as his margin. So I think that's the second area. And that then, of course, bleeds over into 2 U.S. Senate races. And I believe if we don't fix Georgia's election law, that the 2 Senate races will be stolen. You'll end up, no matter how good the Republican campaign is, no matter how good the advertising is, on election night, magically, enough votes will show up to elect the 2 Democrats, no matter how unpopular they are. So I think Georgia becomes the second example. Ronna McDaniel, the Republican National Committee chair, who used to be the Michigan State Republican chair, said last night, and I talked to her about it today, that in Detroit, 72% of the precincts could not validate their records until magically at the very end, everything got fixed late at night. And she said, now, in 2018, it was 80% of the precincts in Detroit. They'd say, for example, oh, we sent out 100 absentee ballots. Oh, and look, 200 came in. And there's no effort to try to figure out what's going wrong there. So just taking that alone in the largest city in Michigan would be enough to assume that we're talking about a pretty large scale corruption. On top of that, I think we have to look at what's happening in Pennsylvania, where Philadelphia may be the most corrupt city in the country. And then finally, we have to look at Wisconsin, where the Wisconsin Election Commission just totally ignored 2 court orders And I think there's some evidence that as many as 200,000 votes may have been involved in things that the Wisconsin Election Commission did that aren't legal or appropriate. So you look around all this, and it comes on top of the fact that, for example, Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, has given away $400 million for turnout, and his foundation happened to only give it to counties that Hillary Clinton carried. So he was disproportionately engaged in helping turn out using foundation money, not political money, foundation money. He happened to be in favor of turnout only where there are going to be voters who favored Biden and not voters who favored Trump. And he's back already in Georgia, putting in more millions of dollars into turnout. Then you have the internet companies, which have been routinely censoring conservatives, censoring people who question the elections. Then you have the news media, which has sustained its 93% anti-Trump attitude and which has routinely refused to cover all the different examples that in a normal year, with this many things normally going wrong, you'd have a very different tone in the news media. But they are so desperate to defeat Trump that just as they don't want to cover Hunter Biden, who, by the way, had a Senate committee report come out yesterday saying that he was doing things in China, he was doing things in Russia, and that Joe Biden knew it, which would have been page one if it had been one of the Trump family. But because of their desperation to protect Biden, they managed to smother as much negative news as they can. And you have these interestingly diverse data points. The Republicans in the House did very well. The Democrats and most of the left-wing analysts thought that the Democrats would pick up 15 seats. I think the Republicans are going to pick up at least 10 and maybe more, and they may end up with a 5 or 6 seat margin for the Democrats, which will make it very hard for Pelosi to get anything serious done. When Bill Clinton won, 2 years later, we picked up 54 seats and won control for the first time since 1954, first time in 40 years. Then, when Obama won, 2 years later, with John Boehner's leadership, we picked up 63 seats. And I raised the question, I don't know whether Biden will be bad enough that we get 60 seats or 50 seats, but you're almost guaranteed historically that Kevin McCarthy is going to be the next speaker and will be sworn in January of 2023. This is compounded by the fact that we are confronted with big Republican gains in the state legislature around the country. We have picked up a governorship, great election for the House, great election for the state legislature. It's a very tough year in terms of how many Republicans and how many Democrats were up. But if we win the 2 Georgia seats, we'll be in good shape with a 52 to 48 Republican margin, and Mitch McConnell will remain the majority leader. That's going to be an uphill fight, and I'll come back to that. If you look at the referendums, almost every referendum in almost every state, unless it related to legalizing marijuana, almost every referendum, the conservatives won and liberals lost, including in California. So there are underlying patterns building that actually look very good for us. And of course, President Trump got more votes than any president in history and more votes than anybody except Biden. So it's not exactly like he was unpopular. And one has to wonder how many of Biden's votes are actually not real. And I think that's part of what these 5 contested states are all about. Let me also say that I think the initial indications from the Biden appointments are it's going to be a very left-wing administration. They've appointed somebody to the transition team at Treasury who is passionately in favor of reparations for African Americans and would spend billions and billions of dollars setting up what I think is an impossible system. They have appointed as the deputy chief of staff somebody who had worked to confiscate guns or have compulsory purchase of guns. So you'd have to sell it to the government and you wouldn't be allowed to own it. They have other people actively engaged with them who have very radical ideas, including eliminating any federal aid to any school that has a religious belief, and in fact, even discrediting it on the grounds that religious beliefs are antithetical to the gay and lesbian movement, which is the primary, it's the group who are pushing that. It's going to be a very interesting time to watch and see what happens. I spend, 4, 5, 6 hours a day just trying to catch up with the news because I'm looking for hints. I'm looking for indicators of where we're going and what's happening. I've said publicly, I don't think the president should concede yet. I think every day that goes by, we're learning more about what went wrong. And I think it's very important. When I say went wrong, I don't mean the campaign. I mean the election. And I think it's very important that we learn all of this. I'm considering doing a book on the reforms we need to have honest elections, because if we don't have honest elections, we're in desperate trouble. Your right to hire and fire the people to whom you loan power is central to our whole system. It's central to what we mean by freedom. And if we're going to go back to a period where the Tammany Hall type machines, where they dominate, then your freedom is basically gone. And you now are at the mercy of corrupt politicians. So I think this is a very big deal. I am not at all comfortable with where we are right now, but I think that it's a topic we're going to continue to explore, and we'll continue to report to you about it. And of course, you go from there to the economy, to international relations, to China, to technological and scientific advances. We're entering a period where there'll be lots and lots to talk about, a lot to look at, and it's not going to slow down. If anything, we may actually see more changes in the next 4 years from all the different factors around the world.
This week on Out Loud with Gianni Caldwell, I talked to a man who's had a profound influence on my life, and I'm talking about my pastor from back home, Dr. Bill Winston, who is the founder and senior pastor of Living Word Christian Center, a non-denominational Christian church with more than 20,000 members located near Chicago. He is also an author, an entrepreneur, educator, and a veteran who has the most amazing and inspiring stories that you'll ever hear. Listen to Out Loud with Gianni Caldwell every Monday on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Debbie, I know you have a whole bunch of questions that have already come in. And I thought we'd start there, and then we'll go and just open the mics and let people ask questions. But do you have some that have already been sent in?
Oh, yeah. The large outpouring that we saw this last week from members that are expressing their anger, their frustration, and their desire to get involved. So Anise from Nevada summed it up beautifully. She said, "I'm feeling powerless. Why is it that the Republicans let the Democrats get away with so much? Is there nothing we can do? What can we do to get involved or make a difference?"
Well, I think, first of all, you can get involved in the politics of Nevada. I got involved actively in 1960 in Georgia when I was a junior in high school. And there was no Georgia Republican Party. Today we have every statewide office plus the majority of the House members plus control both the House and Senate. So over time, you can have a huge impact. Ultimately, the Nevada Democratic Party is a creature of the unions in Las Vegas. I think ultimately they can't, in the end, run the state very well. And I would encourage you to get involved in your local party and get involved in helping candidates, maybe run yourself if you're willing to. That's how you change things. It's a hard business, but it's a pretty straightforward business, and everybody can come and play.
This is one a lot of people wrote in, and you may not know the answer to it, but it was overarching our second most popular one. The news is so conflicting regarding a Trump strategy to win. Do you still see that there's a way to do so? And what would that be?
Well, I think there's two key factors here. I personally believe Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia are all in play. I think it's uphill partially because of the court's reluctance. But remember, in 4 of those 5 states, in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, you have a Republican majority in both the House and the Senate. And in a recent judgment involving a Wisconsin case, we had a justice who wrote very clearly that the Constitution gives the power over federal elections to the state legislature, not the governor, not the courts, not the Secretary of State. I've been advocating publicly that the Georgia legislature should reconvene itself, even if the governor doesn't call them, is just call themselves in. And they should establish an overview to insist on a complete vote count. It is the legislature, technically, which appoints the electors. And I think in these 4 states where we have a majority Republican, they ought to say flatly, they are not going to appoint any electors until they are convinced that there's been an honest and complete recount in which every single ballot has been checked. And we're sure that every legal voter has voted, but no illegal voters. At the same time, I think the federal government has to get involved in Nevada, because there you have a state which has literally legalized corruption. And I think it's intolerable. And I think we have a clear right, but also would be legitimate for a governor of another state to sue the state of Nevada on the grounds that their illegitimate election weakens and dilutes the effectiveness of the governor's state. And that would go straight to the Supreme Court. If one state sues another, it goes straight to the Supreme Court. But I get a sense Justice Alito is very angry, has given speeches publicly about how angry he is and how much he thinks that the local politicians have ignored the court and ignored the law. I think that Justice Kavanaugh wrote this very strong footnote in Wisconsin saying unequivocally, if you read the Constitution, it says it is the state legislatures, not the governors, not the courts, not the Secretary of State. I believe that it's very likely that Gorsuch and Barrett would agree with them, because as original constructionists, just pull out your Constitution and read that section. It is so clear that it's impossible to argue anything else. Now, it also has a very interesting twist, which I don't think they'll go to, but it would certainly cause massive confusion. The Constitution actually says the election will occur on one day. The Constitution actually doesn't have any provision for mail-in ballots or any provision for 45-day-long elections. It says the legislature shall hold the election on one day. And as originalists, it'll be fascinating to see what they would do if they got a case like that. I would also point out that I think Justice Thomas would be very interested in this kind of case. So I suspect you could get a potential 5-4 vote or 6-3 vote in favor of the state legislatures having their constitutional duty. But then the legislatures, who've all gotten slow and soft, and this isn't their kind of business, they've got to learn what their power is and what their responsibility is, and they've got to step up to the plate and do it. And so I would say to anybody who's listening to us in Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, or Pennsylvania, call on your state legislators and ask them to set up a system to supervise all of this and to make sure that they are totally satisfied that the election was honest before they agree to send in any electors.
Mr. Jordan asks, is the information regarding the Dominion software that Sidney Powell's been talking about sufficient for Trump to succeed by January 20th? And do you know if it's true? Have we seen evidence?
I respect Sidney Powell. She wrote a remarkable book called License to Lie, which was about the Justice Department's mistreatment of people. She's done a very, very good job for General Flynn. And the times I've interacted with Sidney, she's very professional and very, very smart. But I do think there's a point where you got to show what you got. And I wish if she does have this evidence, I wish she'd bring it out. We have a project underway at Gingrich 360 where candidly, we're trying to understand this stuff, but it is very murky. I will tell you this, though. One of the election reforms I'm going to recommend, if I do end up writing a book on election law, is going to be that you not have any firm which takes your votes outside the United States. Apparently, the votes were going through Barcelona, Spain, to Frankfurt, Germany to be counted. There's several of these companies, but the one that had the most states was doing all the vote counting outside the United States. And in this day and age, if you ask me, do I trust any system which is on the internet, my answer is no. I don't mind a computer that's isolated and off the internet. But if it's on the internet, it is subject to hacking. And if you look at the quality of Russian and Chinese hackers, or for that matter, the quality of the best American hackers, the idea that these things are safe, I think, is lunacy. I'm not saying that they necessarily were used to steal the election for Biden. I'm just saying that the basic construct of the system is profoundly wrong, which is why, for example, the state of Texas turned down buying the Dominion equipment.
Eleanor wants your opinion on a Breitbart article where, in an interview with Stacey Abrams by Jake Tapper, she believes the Democrats can absolutely fill both Senate seats in the runoff in January. What's your opinion on that?
I think she may be right. I take very seriously the danger that we could lose those two seats, and you could have Senator Schumer as majority leader, which would lead to gun confiscation. It would lead to tax increases. It would lead to the District of Columbia getting 2 U.S. senators. Just go down the list. It would lead probably to packing the court. It would certainly lead to efforts, I think, to dramatically roll back our liberties. So I take very seriously how big a deal this is. I hope by January 5th that we've gotten the message out and that they're back up and running. But I'm very concerned about the 2 Senate seats in Georgia.
Leon from Virginia is a retired U.S. Naval intelligence officer who worked for the Naval Investigative Services in D.C. His job was to run special background investigations for individuals seeking very high security clearances. His question is, the president has to have the above top secret level of clearances. So given Vice President Biden's dealings with the Ukraine and communist China, how could he ever be granted this clearance?
Well, the president isn't granted clearance. The president is clearance. The objective fact is if the American people select somebody to be president, whether it's Donald Trump or Bill Clinton or George W. Bush or Barack Obama or Joe Biden, the act of selecting them gives them access to all of America's secrets by definition. The president's the person who creates the security system. He's not the person who's subordinate to it. And it has to be that way. Fact is, if in the end we lose all these, and if in the end Joe Biden becomes president, he is president. And that means that he will have all of the prerogatives and power of the presidency.
Roy and Joan from Virginia have a suggestion. With the vaccine on the nation's doorstep, why isn't its arrival widely labeled as the Trump vaccine? He's behind the true success, and it needs to be labeled before the incoming administration takes all the credit for it.
Well, if we lived in a world that was fair, it probably would be called the Trump vaccine, but I somehow don't see NBC News uttering the term the Trump vaccine, although I will confess, CNN yesterday gave President Trump credit for it and said that this was his great achievement and that he deserved recognition for it. It was a mildly shocking moment in the history of CNN.
Okay, Woody, let's go over to you and let's take some questions from people who are here live with us today.
I know. My question is, if all the states choose to certify their votes, can President Trump still contest this election and take it to the Supreme Court, or is it a done deal at that point?
So certification actually is the step before most lawsuits. That doesn't preclude him from having all of his legal rights. And the key dates are the 14th of December, when the electors first meet, and then the ballots that they cast, I think it's on the 6th of January. And those are the key dates. And so I think after the 6th, unless no one's gotten 270 electoral votes, at which point it goes to the House and Senate, and they make a decision.
Good morning. My question is not one that involves the urgency of the election, but I have long thought that one of the keys to making our republic better is to have term limits. And I know that was part of the contract with America. And my questions are, do you agree? And do you think that will happen in the relatively near future?
I think I could live with, say, 12-year term limits. I think that you'd have more turnover. You'd have more new blood coming in. I would oppose anything shorter than 12 years because, frankly, it takes a while to learn the legislative process. It's really a complicated business. In an ideal way, the right kind of term limit's the next election. And if somebody's a bad member, you ought to go ahead and beat them. But it's very hard to imagine getting the Congress to voluntarily set term limits for itself. But in the various state legislatures, that has happened. So it's conceivable, but I think it's uphill.
Thank you for taking my question. Is there any cohesive plan at the level of GOP, RNC, to set up a national strategy to win elections, given the way these elections happen lately?
Well, it's a good question. I would say actually they had a pretty good strategy on the House side. They knew that they wanted to recruit very broadly. They had largest victories for minority groups and for women in the history of the House Republican Party. They went out and really recruited hard to get really good candidates. And they had a strategy really of taking on Pelosi and pitting the local Democrat against Pelosi in a way which seemed to work pretty well. I think that the president had a strategy which came close to emphasize the economy on one hand, to emphasize things like the breakthroughs of the vaccines, and then to emphasize how radical Kamala Harris was and how inevitably radical Biden would be. He relatively followed that, probably did a little more attacking Biden personally than I would have recommended, because it actually, I think, weakened the case. The challenge with Biden was not that he was inadequate. The challenge was that in the end, he was going to represent a very left-wing government, which is what I think we'll see in the next couple of months.
Newt, I'm concerned that the media has just decided that this election is over and that there's nothing that can be done, so that if something big does happen, it will be pushed back and not accepted by the general population. What's your feelings about that?
I think that's a very wise and very sophisticated approach. I agree with you. I think the media was desperate to defeat Trump. The first chance they got to say something, they called it very early. And people need to remember, not a single state has been certified yet. What you have is a coronation by the news media who hate Trump and who would have preferred anybody, I think, to Trump. And of course, they want to create an environment in which people say, well, why are you still counting votes? Well, the answer is, it has nothing to do with Trump. We owe it to the American people to find out how many examples of corruption and dishonesty are embedded in the system. And it would actually, I think, be a disservice to America if Trump conceded too early and didn't insist on completing the vote counts and the appeals process. Every day I learn new examples of how the corruption occurs and what the bad guys are doing. And that's only going to happen if we continue to keep the heat on.
Newt, here's my question. What percentage of Senate Republicans are confused about the idea that the base has expectations to support President Trump and will remain the leader of the party after this election, no matter what? Seems like a lot of them think he's going to go away and they can have business as usual. Love to get your thoughts.
I think overwhelmingly they think that he will be a dominating figure. Again, 4 years is a long time. If he wants to run again, he would be very, very formidable. But he may also look around and decide, it's been a lot of fun, but it's not how he wants to spend the rest of his life. I think that the values and the policies he stands for will bear the test of time. And I think probably 70 or 80% of the party will be broadly in favor of a Trump vision of the world. But I don't think you should assume automatically that he would win the nomination, nor should you assume automatically that he'd run. So there's plenty of time and space there for other people to come out, do a good job. And frankly, it's good for the party. But if you could get 20 or 30 candidates who think they may want to run for president and get all of them working in 2022 to elect House and Senate candidates, you'd have a lot of energy out there helping the Republican Party. I'm for lots of people having a chance. Go try it out, give speeches, raise money, get better known. Creates a much healthier party. You have many choices. If you find this useful, feel free to send them on to your friends and to encourage your friends to join and be part of the Inner Circle. It's a program I really like, and as you can see today, brings together a lot of different people, a lot of ideas, and we're going to continue developing it. So thank you all very, very much, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Thank you to my guests, the founding members of my Inner Circle Club. You can become a member of the Inner Circle by going to newtsinnercircle.com or by visiting our show page at newtsworld.com. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.